Welcome to this week's episode of Startups for the Rest of Us. I'm Rob Walling. Thanks for joining me again this week. Today, I dive into listener questions with Ruben Gomez, the founder of BidSketch and DocSketch, which is electronic signatures. And he is soon renaming that to SignWell, as you will hear in this episode. But today we talk about different models of bootstrapping success. We talk about hiring W-2 versus hiring contractors. We talk about how to determine if a business is an ideal fit for bootstrapping versus one that isn't. And we once again revisit enterprise pricing. Thanks so much for joining me today. If we're not connected on Twitter, I'm at Rob Walling, and Startups for the Rest of Us is at StartupsPod. And with that, let's dive into our listener questions. Ruben Gomez, welcome back to Startups for the Rest of Us. Thanks for joining me, man.
Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. Let's dive straight into some listener questions. Of course, per usual, voicemails go to the top of the stack. And in this episode, we are debuting our first ever video voicemail. So if you're watching this on YouTube or on Twitter, you'll actually see a video of James Kennedy asking a question, but we'll also obviously pull the audio in for your listening enjoyment.
Hey, this new Ask a Question feature on Startups for the Rest of Us website is cool, so I couldn't resist but submit a question. So, Rob, or guest, there's been many ways that people in the Bootstrap community have been winning the last 10 years. You know, I think of Rob and his exit. I think of Ruben with his many successes and his seemingly increasing success, and Peldy, and, you know, there's the rock stars who we consider to be the rock stars of the community. But I was wondering, who are your 5 top templates for success that you've seen as bootstrappers, maybe for different reasons? Maybe some have exited, maybe some are holding on, maybe some have gone big, maybe some are staying small. I'd be interested to see who you admire most within the bootstrapping community. Keep up the great work.
Thanks for the question, James, and for trying out our new video ask. You can go to startupsfortherestofus.com, and there's an ask a question link at the top, and you can do audio or video asks just right there in the website or from your phone. So with that, he asked about who we admire most as bootstrappers. I think we can just throw out a few folks who I think we respect, who are doing good work, pushing things forward. And bootstrapping is such a trip because I'd say bootstrapping and mostly bootstrapping, let's be clear, right? If you've raised a small amount of funding, non-venture track, right? We're not going to be purists about it. But there are some people who are really ambitious bootstrappers, right? And they want to build a $5 million, $10 million bootstrap company and sell that for a lot of money, or maybe they want to pull a bunch of profit on it. And then there are, I think, people who are building awesome, amazing lifestyle businesses of like, hey, we're doing $50K a month and it's me or 2 people, and we're just raking in profit on that. So those are 2 models. Maybe there's a third you have in mind, but who are some folks that you see in our space, who you respect and you feel like are doing good work?
That's right. They're also, besides like just trying to be super profitable, having larger teams, and the ones that are a lot more efficient with the people that they have on the team and the revenue that they're basically optimizing for revenue in some cases. There are 2 names that come to mind, or 3 names that come to mind. First, I would say Ted and Harry from MoreAware. And I like how they've been bootstrapping for a long time. They've been building their business, and they didn't have like this crazy growth right from the beginning. It took them a while, but they have a great business right now. They're super profitable. They like to optimize for revenue per employee, which is kind of interesting. I've always liked that way of thinking. And I just like how they run their business. I always have.
I agree with you. And it's MoraWare.com, MoreAware.com. It's the best, right? 16 years they've been working on it, and they come to a lot of microconfs, and it's countertop software. It's SaaS for countertop installers. People, they need to design granite or like cutting, schedule things. It's a whole suite. And so it's a crazy cool niche.
Yeah, it's a niche product. There's also Jordan Gall, which has had Carthook. He's doing something new now, which wouldn't be Rally wouldn't be considered bootstrapping at this point. But that's a really interesting story there as well. With Carthook, he's just been, I'd probably put him in the more aggressive sort of category. He seeks more aggressive growth. He's good with building larger teams. He's also optimizing for revenue, but he doesn't think twice about spending money if it's going to lead to growth. So it's not necessarily about that optimizing revenue per employee sort of way that Harry and Ted do.
Right. And yet still have a lot of respect for him as an operator and as someone who mostly bootstrap.
Right. He does what is needed to grow really great business. And he's done it. First time, he's doing it again this time.
Yeah, and that is such a fascinating difference between those two examples. When you say aggressive, you don't mean interpersonally for Jordan. You mean he's just aggressive about growing a business, that he is willing to hire a team of 30 people and to, hey, I'm going to raise more funding to do this within reason, not going to be this crazy venture-backed story necessarily, although as we're talking about at Rally, I know he's working at a different level now, but I actually had them on my list as well. A couple other folks I thought about include Peldy from Balsamic, right? One of the OGs. And he has, he wanted to be a solo and then just hires individuals as needed and obviously doing very well in terms of profit. I think he runs more like Moraware, where I don't know that he looks at profit per employee or revenue per employee, but I do know that he thinks of it like this is a long-term business. And I can imagine Peldy running Balsamic in 15, 20 years. Versus folks who, at least in my experience, folks who are ambitious about growth tend to be moving towards an exit. I'm not saying everyone, but that is like the pattern that I see. And Peldy is not like growth, I'm going to do it. It's kind of like, no, serve our customers, show up. And not saying he would never sell, but another example is Matt, Joel, and Ken at Churnbuster. And they acquired Churnbuster from Andrew Culver a few years ago, but they're doing really well. I'm an angel investor, so I kind of know the ins and outs of that. And they're a pretty cool balance, actually, because they want growth, but they're not like, it's certainly not growth at all costs or even as aggressive or ambitious as like pushing like Jordan. And yet they have success in their own way. And it's a very profitable business. And they're looking at taking out profit distributions to investors, which I think is something a lot of people talk about that as a goal. And very, very few bootstrappers who are not solo, who actually take investment, wind up doing that. A lot of them, again, that I see wind up exiting instead of doing that. So that's a fun one. And then I think I'll name two more. So I think what Rand Fishkin is doing with SparkToro is pretty cool. He raised his round. He said, I don't know if he's public. Again, I'm an investor there. So I don't know if he's public about revenue, but I believe he said it's tens of thousands of dollars a month. And it's just him and Casey, and they have some contractors. So like they're doing fine.
I like that one. It's very interesting how the difference between what he's doing with SparkToro and what he did with Moz, and how based off of everything that you learned from what happened at Moz, how he's just changing his approach. That's a cool one.
And then Michelle and Matthias Hansen with Geocodio. I think they're a good example of folks who have built, it's just, as far as I know, it's just the two of them. If I were to guess, it's doing 10, 20, 30 grand, some number that will throw off a lot of profit for two people and funds a lifestyle. And I don't get the feeling that they have the intention of growing it big. I don't get the feeling that they want to sell it, but they are living that corner. That's another, perhaps contrasting with a Jordan Gall approach, or even my approach, right? Or your and my approach of, hey, I want this thing to get big. I'm going to compete in a big space. And the idea of exiting is, for a lot of money is intriguing. I don't think that, that's something they want to do.
How would you have described your approach when you were doing Drip?
It's interesting. It switched. The idea was like, oh, this will be another lifestyle business. This will be great. Because Hittail before it was doing 25, 30 grand a month. It was just me, few contractors. So it was that amazing cash machine. And it was the most profitable and the most money, right, that I had ever pulled out of a business. So Drip, I was thinking, could it be bigger than that, still profitable, but really just be me or a couple people? I didn't want to grow a team. That's how it started. And by the time we pivoted into becoming full-blown ESP and then marketing automation, I was like, we can't do that. We have to hire. And when we got to, obviously 10 people when we were acquired, my approach by that time had become, this is an opportunity that I don't think I should fumble, because the how big the space was and how much traction we were getting and the kind of mini brand that we had built, it felt like I would have been doing myself a disservice in my life to not take advantage of that and try to build it. And I didn't suddenly become, I'm going to build it and sell it. But I did see the path to many sevens figures, and frankly, probably would be, at this point, if I was still running it, it would, be in the 8 figures, which obviously it is now with the new owners. But that was that. How would you describe your approach? Because see, folks know you founder of BidSketch, now the founder of Signwell, and BidSketch is proposal software, SaaS, and Signwell is electronic signature, which is a much, much larger and much more competitive space. And so it's a different, would you say those two are similar, where BidSketch is maybe the lifestyle portion and Signwell is like this thing can get really, really big?
I think that's right. With BidSketch, it was definitely about I just quit my job to do that full time. And it was just to take out as much cash as I could out of the business and have as much free time as I possibly could while doing it. Growing the business, but not being like necessarily super aggressive. At times being more aggressive than others about growth. But for DocSketch, it's definitely a different beast. It's from the start, it was more of a longer term approach versus like with BidSketch, I had to optimize a little bit more on the revenue side because I wanted to do that full time, and then it was the only thing paying for the bills. Once I started DocSketch, I had BidSketch that I could leverage to pay some of the bills, and I could take a different approach to try and build something much bigger, longer term. Sometimes when you overly optimize for revenue early on, you damage your chances for creating something much bigger later on. So that's sort of how I'm thinking about the differences between the two.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you weren't on the show today, you would have been in my top 2 or 3. It would have been Peldy, Ruben, and Jordan in terms of folks that I think are pushing things forward and just have a cool outlook on it. And in case folks missed it, you called it DocSketch. I called it Signwell because you are renaming it in the coming weeks. You have publicly announced that to your user base. So it's not like I'm breaking news, but just so folks understand that.
Right.
BidSketch and DocSketch, but now DocSketch is becoming Signwell.
Yep.
Very cool. It's an interesting topic. I don't think we've ever really chatted about that in the past. I got another question from James Kennedy. This one is an audio, and we will roll that here.
Hey, good morning from a beautiful beach in Dublin Bay. It's James Kennedy here, listening to you talking about full-time versus W-2 versus contractors. Another topic that's interesting is outlook and view. Like if you use upworking people who are used to remote working, contractors, they have a different outlook rather, which can be for good or ill. Oftentimes contractors who are working on Upwork or other remote places, they actually do want stability of a long-term gig so you can hire, give them 40 hours a week. And then the other side of it is, forgetting the W-2 side of it is, there's paperwork, but probably the bigger part is the emotional commitment. It's a different mindset. If you're hiring for a full-time position at all levels, really, they just have a different mindset, and you have a higher bar to meet their expectations, which I'm not saying is good or bad, but it's harder to meet their expectations.
We didn't get James's full question. I'm not sure if there was an issue on his end or on the video ask end, but in general, I think what he's saying is there are pros and cons to hiring contractors versus, in the US, we call them W-2 employees. It's usually 1099 versus W-2 is kind of the US designations, but really it's, am I paying you as a contractor versus you're really a full-time employee with full benefits and I think of it as being like truly part of the team. And he's saying there are pros and cons on both sides, right? It's like full-time W-2 employees often have expectations of mentorship and a raise every year and a budget to do this and, whatever else, progression of their career versus oftentimes contractors or consultants, you're hiring them for a result. And if they don't perform, you can let them go quickly versus W-2 folks. It's harder. It's harder to fire someone, right? Just mentally and even legally, I'd say in a lot of places. So what's your thinking? You have hired a lot of people over the years for your companies. And when do you look at hiring contract versus W-2?
Would you put somebody who's full-time but a contractor in the category of contractor? Because we know several people, right, that talk about their job as my client. They say my client, that's all they do. They don't have any other clients. I've always thought of it as it's got to be somebody that has other clients or potentially can have other clients. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a good point to bring up is you can hire a contractor for 40 hours a week. And in essence, they're like a W-2 employee, right? And I think that's about the communication. And it's about when you're hiring being like, look, we have to pay you as a contractor because XYZ reason. Usually it's you live in another country and trying to hire you through the IRS and your country's thing. It's just way easier to do it as a contractor. But we want you to be, you are part of the team, and we want you to feel like this is your full-time job. And we have the loyalty to you that it's a full-time job, and we will give you raises, evaluations, progression. But what we need from you is, I don't want you to take on other contract work. Like that's the expectation, right? So I think it's about communication there. And I think if you leave it open, I don't know. I think it depends. You're right. We have a lot of folks who have a 40-hour week contract gig, and they treat it as a client. They don't have that connection. So I think it can go either way, just based on conversation.
Okay, gotcha. So the main thing that I think about, and I'm working with both, I have for years, is whether or not it's core to what you have to do, right? Like if you have a software company, generally that's kind of core, building the software, improving it. It's the product. It's part of the offer. So like development is generally going to be full-time. In some cases, budget may not be there to where you can afford, like in the early days for BidSketch, it was a couple of developers that were part-time developers, they were contractors. But if you can afford it, then yeah, I would say that's full-time. And that doesn't mean you don't enhance that team with, contractors from time to time or anything like that. And then just stuff that I kind of like the way that Rand was talking about it last time, right? To where it can make sense for marketing, certain types of roles to where performance is going to be really clear. And sometimes it's just better to have even an agency to where you have a team of people bringing you results and working together to like create really high quality work. And it's hard to just hire one person that can compete with that. And if they're not performing, then you find another contractor or an agency that can get you the results that you want.
Right. And that was advice that, you and I chatted about content marketing help that I'm looking for with TinySeed, right? Of like, we've put some content pieces out that have done very well, like tinyseed.com/thesis. And we had a blog post about the software industry iceberg. And it just took a tremendous amount of time for us to do. And we have data, we have thoughts, but to actually write it, edit it, produce it, promote it was dozens and dozens of hours from our team. And frankly, we're busy mentoring founders, and running application processes and running an accelerator in essence. And so I was bouncing ideas off folks and I was like, I'm going to hire a content marketer, right? I'm going to hire someone to help us do this thought leadership stuff to produce some of this. And when you and I chatted, I was like, I have a lead on someone who's W-2, could be full-time. And you're like, don't do it, man. You're like because if one person is in content marketing is nowhere near as good as an agency of 3 or 4 people who have different skill sets, right? There's the strategist, and then there's the writer, and then there's the editor, and then there's often a designer, right, who then puts polish on it.
Yeah, I think one of the mistakes that people might make in that situation is say like, oh, then I'll hire a contractor part-time or lower the budget or something like that. The comparison should really be almost, at the same budget.
Yeah. And that's the thing you did ask, is content marketing core to operating TinySeed? And it's not, right? We have been operating it without a ton of content marketing for the past year. We put out a few things, but it is not a core competency versus running the accelerator like Tracy does, or fundraising, right? Like Einar and I are doing. Like those are core competencies. And as you're saying, like a software company, it's your developers, it's your product people. So I would say it's marketing. I would not tend to outsource, right, marketing and sales to contractors in general. I think all things being equal, although I guess if you're going to outsource, like if we were to say, okay, you have enough budget to hire agencies to do certain things like content marketing, like B2B SaaS content marketing, I could see that. A lot of it comes down to budget, right?
Right. So if paid acquisition is kind of working for you, that's often a really good use case for going with an agency or somebody who does it all the time, because it changes so fast and so much, right? Versus like...
Yeah, learning it yourself.
Yeah. Or hiring an employee whose only job is that.
It's a tough sell. Yeah.
What's your take on the thing that we've seen a little bit more often with like, what's his name? Suhail?
Sahil at Gumroad?
Yes, with like basically all part-time contractors filling in for core roles.
That's not something I would personally do. I don't know how Gumroad is structured or how it works, but usually I think of if I am going to truly hire a role that is going to be part-time, I'm going to tend to make them contractors. But in general, I do like having dedicated resources to my stuff, whether that is an agency that I can afford, or it is someone who is in on what we need. Back in the day when I was bootstrapped, it didn't have the budget for it, right? And everybody was contract, and most people started as part-time, but I tried to get them to full-time as soon as I could because I noticed there was a difference in their focus and a difference in their willingness. They didn't just show up and get the job done. It comes back to that task level thinker, project level thinker, owner level thinker, right? Strategic thinkers. And you can absolutely hire contractors to do task level stuff. It's harder to find folks who do project stuff, but you can find project level. But I don't know contractors who are like that owner level strategic thinkers, but I do know folks who will come on full time with you and be on that journey with you.
Yeah, that makes sense. In the local Slack over here in Portland with a few friends, we were discussing that. Somebody was considering taking that approach because they've seen it a little bit more and more. My take was similar. Yeah, it's similar to yours. I'm not a big fan of it, especially when you end up having their trade-offs. And I get part of it is not having the overhead of like a W-2 employee for, you don't have to do these one-on-ones. You don't have to do a lot of the HR stuff. You don't have to do some of the paperwork. But then the trade-off is that you get somebody who's really not as committed, and you get overhead in a different way. Now you're dealing with more people than before, right? So instead of a team of 10, I'm not sure how many people, are on like working for Gumroad, 10, 15 people, you end up with 30 people maybe, right? And that's a totally different thing. That makes things a lot more difficult in a different way. I don't like that trade-off, especially for core stuff. And then often those people are filling their time with other client projects, and that affects timelines and things like that. So generally not a fan of it.
My thinking on it has changed because I used to be all part-time contractors, and then I was some full-time contractors. And then once I experienced, like I said, the buy-in and the ownership of having full-time W-2 people, I was like, oh, okay, if I'm going to build that kind of business, I want my core stuff covered. If I want to build an amazing lifestyle, again, coming back to lifestyle, that's not a pejorative term for me. That is like lifestyle business is a cash cow. It's a great business, And if I want to build a business where I can just take out maximum profits and I'm willing to project manage and have a lot of resources, like you're saying, 2 or 3 times the number of people and they're all part-time, that's an approach. It's just, I don't think it's an approach that I would take anymore. And it's just not the kind of business that I want to build. Thanks for the questions, James. That was super helpful. And again, video and voicemail questions, they go to the top of the stack, startupsfortherestofus.com. You can hit the Ask a Question button at the top. Our next question came from Twitter, and it's from Jeff Swenson. His Twitter handle is JS Swenson with an E. And he was just asking me a question directly. He said, do you have any content that addresses how to determine if an idea is fit for bootstrapping versus one that isn't? First thing I will say is, I don't think there's a direct dichotomy of bootstrapping or not. There's often like, do I bootstrap? Do I want to raise a small amount of funding? Or do I want to venture track? I would say there's a continuum, but those are at least 3 different options. But my response to him was, I haven't specifically created content on this, but in general, I believe you can bootstrap almost any software company. But if you're dealing with manufacturing or real estate, right, like WeWork, then probably not. It's going to be really, really hard. You're going to want to raise money. And then there's businesses that only work at scale, like Facebook, where if you build a SaaS and you have 1 client, they get value out of it and they pay you. If you have 10 clients, they get value out of it and they pay you. Facebook with 1, 10, 100 people is worthless, right? So that's the kind of business that needs to be at scale, not only to provide value to the group through the network effect, but to then have enough scale that you can monetize it with ads, which is how those types of business, the consumer type businesses tend to be not funded, but the way they tend to monetize. So I thought this was a really interesting question because I hadn't exactly thought it through to that extent before I was replying to him. I think the one other thing is 2-sided marketplaces are possible to bootstrap, but I think you need an audience. Not need is not the right word. I think you're almost destined to fail if you do not already have an audience with one side of that network, right? That you're not trying to bootstrap a 2-sided marketplace and get both markets at once or both sides of it at once. So I think that'd be the other one that I would throw out. What do you think about this question? Bootstrappable versus not?
I totally, completely agree with what you said. I would, if you need money, if it's just super expensive because of, some technology or something like that, then yeah, those are really difficult. Or if you need money for different reasons because you have to, for some reason, delay the revenue side, those are also tough, right? It's something that needs to be free for you to capture certain, and this is super related to what you were just talking about, parts of the market to make the business work. And that can look like all sorts of different businesses, but those are the ones that just jump out at me. Other than that, you can, even if you're thinking about, because in the past people have said, well, like project management or like these big categories, you really shouldn't bootstrap these businesses. And I think if you go into some of those categories, it's best if you probably pick a segment and go after that segment instead of just sort of be really horizontal. And if you don't have any connections and you don't have a way to make that work, then that can be really tough if you're just bootstrapping.
I would say the same thing about building an ESP, right? An email service provider, and then Drip and ConvertKit bootstrapped, right? And then, think of Derek Reimer with going against Calendly with SavvyCal, where, you could say, oh, he raised tiny seed money, but he didn't need that money. That just extended his runway. He had his Drip money to essentially bootstrap himself. And
there's a big difference between raising money at that level versus like a VC.
Oh, yeah. 120 grand versus 5 million. I mean, it's just night and day, right?
There's no comparison.
Yeah. And that's where, I think the perception that again, it was customer.io, right? It was when Colin said fund strapping. And the first time I heard that was 2013 or 2014. And I hadn't realized that there was this third path. And that's from then on, I started thinking, wow, I wanted to start funding businesses like that right away, right? And that became all the rest of my angel investments and eventually led to us starting Tiny Seed. That was a big part of it, is like, it's night and day raising, again, 120, 180K versus several $1 million. A lot of people don't know that. The moment you say, oh, I raised some funding, it's like they think, oh, you're just on this lightning track and you're owned by the VCs. And it's like, no, it really isn't that way anymore.
It's pretty funny though, on the VC side, I've seen some VCs like Andrew Chen and others say, and have discussions with other people like, no, they're bootstrapped. They only raised $1 million, right? Anything under $1 million is bootstrapped. But they just consider it so different.
Yep. Because you still have to be capital efficient. You raise a few $100,000 and you're going after a big opportunity. I mean, $1 million is a lot. To me, that still sounds like a lot because I don't play, but they're playing in completely different waters. But when I think of someone raising $500,000 or less, which is most of my angel investments and the Tiny Seed investments, a few have gone on to raise more than that, but you still have to think like a capital efficient person, because that's just not enough money to hire. Like you can't hire a team of 20 and try to just hyper growth out of that. You can hire a couple people and your burn rate gets high real quick, when you do it that way.
You can try it.
Yeah.
But it's not going to work out that well.
That's right. It's easy to burn through it. So anyways, yeah, that was a good question. Thanks for sending that over, Jeff. Last question of the day. This question is from Steve at skillsdbpro.com. And the subject line is pricing again. Yes, again. And he says, hey, Rob, big fan. Your work thoughts and guests offer beyond valuable insights that are actionable as well as motivational on a daily basis. Thank you. Our out-of-the-box pricing is $1 a seat per month. Our average size client is 500 seats and normally are either a division of a large Fortune 5000 company or a smaller 300-person company that uses us as their sole talent and learning solution. I have a question about pricing that can best be shown in this email I got from a lead today. And this was 7 months ago. Sorry for we have a lot of questions in the backlog. And so the lead wrote, thanks again for the demo yesterday. It was great to see the potential use case. I'd be interested in setting up another demo with more people in my org. Let's find a time that works. Also, if you could fit together a very enticing proposal based on up to 8,000 users, that would be helpful, as there could potentially be interest in setting something up before the end of the calendar year. So now switching back to Steve's email, he says, in addition to emails like this, we recently had a request from an existing client to bid out 60,000 seats. They were currently using 1,000 seats in a division and they wanted to expand it. We did not get this deal because we can't seem to get the pricing right on these larger volumes. They said we were too expensive even at a hefty double-digit discount, yet they had no problem paying full price for the division. I'm terrified of underbidding larger projects and end up bearing myself with both work and money. I'm sure you've had this problem at Drip or one of your guests have run into this. I'm just out of my league figuring out how to price large clients, and they are coming our way more often. Thanks for any thoughts you have on this. What do you think, sir?
First, I love this business. I mean,
they're great.
Yeah. 500 seats, 6,000, 60,000. It's great. The way that I would approach it, and we're at the lower end of the market for Signwell right now, but we're releasing and onboarding the API product, which is mid-market and more towards enterprise. We're also now HIPAA compliant and SOC 2. So those are much bigger deals, and the pricing is just completely different. One of the things that I've been doing is just spending a lot of time doing research on how these products are priced in our category. I think that's really important because you're not usually for a lot of these bigger deals especially, you're not competing in a vacuum. They're getting bids and they're talking to other vendors, they say. So I would, first thing is just find out how they're pricing, how some of your competitors are pricing these larger deals. Because if you're not getting these deals, somebody else is. So I would figure that part out first and then think about how you're going to be positioned in this market. If you're newer and you're trying to break in, you're probably going to, depending on your positioning and brand, can be maybe on the lower end compared to the alternatives in there. But it's really just hard to sort of make up your own pricing and experiment. There's definitely, you have to do some experimentation with this stuff, but it helps a lot if you know what, you basically understand what the customer is looking at. You can see it from their perspective.
That's a big deal. If none of your competitors publish their pricing online, then you have to dig in and figure that out, because if you're in the dark, I think you'll keep losing these. I mean, my initial thought, I'm 100% what you said is what I would do. Without any of that information, I have heard of these big enterprise deals. You have 1,000 seats and then you have 60,000 seats. Like, that's a big difference, right? And a 40% discount at 60,000 seats is still, in my opinion, probably not enough. Like, I've heard of enterprise deals that have 80% discounts at massive scale, right? They really bring it down. Now you have to figure out, does your cost structure work with that? Is that really where it needs to go? And unless you have some inkling as to what your competitors are doing, you really are just guessing at that point. And it's tough, and it can be stressful or at least complicated and take a lot of time. Every time you have to fill out one of these proposals, I've sat in front of proposals, whether I was, selling my own consulting work when I was a micro agency, or we had some really big Drip contracts where I just sat in front of it and I was like, okay, it's $2,000 a month. No, it's $2,500. No, it's $3,000. Like I was literally just kind of making it up, thinking I really do want this. This will move our needle. But I don't want to underbid. So how do you get there? And I had the luxury of knowing they're looking at MailChimp and ActiveCampaign, and you could just go to their website and get the pricing. So at least I had an idea of, I am going to price myself higher, and then pitch them on, here's why we're worth that. Or I'm going to price myself in the middle, or I'm going to be the cheapest, and it's still a profitable kind of bid for us.
That's a good point. Like, if you're discounting that heavily, it might just not be something that you want to compete in. That's also a decision that you need to make, right? Like, where can you win? Where do you want to compete right now? It doesn't mean that it's always going to be that way, but it can save you a lot of time and hassle.
Yeah, I agree. I also think it's like, if you're a commodity, and I don't know that SkillsDB Pro is or isn't, but if you're generally a commodity and generally the same product and they're just comparing apples to apples, it's tough to not compete on price, because otherwise, kind of the same. So then I start thinking, well, how do I get a SOC 2 compliance? How do I get a single sign-on, or get a feature or feature set that other people don't have? Or how do I get a HIPAA compliant? How can I get these things? And again, maybe all your competitors have all those things too, and maybe it just is a mature space and it's really hard to differentiate. But that's where unique positioning and differentiated features, or I include HIPAA and SOC 2 as features, like differentiation allows you to have pricing power, right? This is like economics, 101 or 102 is if you're commoditized, it's mostly on price, and differentiation allows you to do something other than that and to make a higher profit. So thanks for the question, Steve. Appreciate you writing in again. And it was kind of a fun thing to think through. Ruben Gamez, you are at EarthlingWorks on Twitter, where you're like, I don't know, you're an elder statesman of bootstrapping and of the microconf community. It's like you go on Twitter and you say wise things.
Is that another way of saying old?
No, I did use the phrase elder, but
OG, yeah.
OG, yeah, realistically. But whenever I see you respond on Twitter, I'm like, this guy knows what he's talking about. So if you're not following EarthlingWorks, you should go out and do that. And obviously, docsketch.com. When this goes live, but soon it will be Signwell, SIGNwell.com. And in fact, I should have you back on the show, both to give updates on what's going on with your business, because a bunch has happened, but to talk us through that thought process of renaming your company, because it was, I know there have to be some people out there who are thinking of the same thing. And much like I told you, I'm going to tell them don't do it. But in this case, right, I think it's the right call. And so that'd be a fun story to walk through at some point once you're on the other side of it.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Cool.
Awesome, man. Well, so thanks again. Thanks for coming on the show. Thanks again to Ruben for joining me this week. And thank you for joining me once again. I'm going to wrap this episode without further ado, and I'll be back in your earbuds again next Tuesday morning.